What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series, we are going to be going over Block Shields Part 4. And in this episode specifically, we are going to be going over having the block shield durability go down as you are holding it, as well as regenerate when you release the block button, you're no longer blocking. So we'll come into our game here. And to this point, all four of the characters have been able to block. And when they block, they were able to receive hits, which would decrease the durability. And once the durability was out, they would become stunned. That is all still going to happen. But we're going to take the Shawnthebro character here, which is the first character on the left, and we're going to start blocking. You'll notice the block shield decreases over time because its durability is depleting. Eventually it reaches 0 and it snaps and the character gets stunned. Now, when they come out of the stun, they still have their full durability. However, we don't want to always just hold block until we are stunned. We want to release, and we want to be able to regenerate some of that block shield. So if we release and we wait, the next time we go to block, we will have block shield back. Now, if I get it at the right time, I can actually start blocking, release, start blocking shortly after, and you'll see I did regenerate some of my block shield, but not all of it. So you see it regenerates in the background, so you can't just keep spamming regenerate, otherwise you are going to lose all your block shield. But now it is not only on hits, it also goes down over time. Now hits will make it go down faster, so if I take my default character here right next to him, and I start blocking with my first character and attack with my other character, you can see the block shield went down way faster. But regardless, once it depletes, the character is going to be stunned because their block shield broke. That's what we're going for today. So if you'd like to get caught up in the series before checking this episode out, feel free to click this iCard right here in the top right corner. Really appreciate it, and it will help you guys learn how we did every other mechanic in this game. You can see everything we've done to date, which is really super useful. If you don't care about every mechanic in here, but you do care about the block shield, I would recommend that you check out this episode right here in the top right corner. And this is the episode where we first implemented the block shield system. So you will be able to actually mimic this blocking behavior without following the rest of the series. I also would love to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support. I've updated the tiers, the benefits, and everything about the Patreon and YouTube membership. I made these changes between the last video I put out and now, so they're really new, so I recommend checking them out if you haven't already. With all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial, but we are going to be doing everything in this episode within the code today. So we're going to go into the code and we're going to go to our SSB template character.h. In here, what we're going to be doing is improving our block shield logic. That way we have more customization and flexibility with that system. So I'm scrolling down to my variables. And if you had followed this series to this point, then you will have 3 variables for blocking. You'll have your max block shield durability, which is the maximum durability that the block shield can have, and the maximum that it can regenerate to. You will have an integer block shield durability, which is the current durability of the block shield, and you'll have the block shield break stun frames. So how long the character is stunned once they have their block shield broken. These were all integers, but I've decided to make one update to make the block shield durability a float. Now, the reason I've made this block shield durability a float is because I want to be able to precisely track how big the block shield should be. Now, when receiving a hit, sure, we could have it as an integer because we say 1 hit reduces the durability by 1 unit, or however many units, depending on the damage of the hit. However, if we're going to start doing it over time, just by holding the block shield like we are doing in this episode, we want to make all these little changes. And floats have decimals, whereas integers don't. So we can easily do 1.01, 1.25, 1.67 for our durability instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The good thing is converting this integer to a float is super simple. In fact, it won't really make us have to change anything. We're just going to change it here in the .h file, and then going forward we will use it as a float instead of an integer. I will also go over how we can convert any logic in place to represent a float instead of an integer, but honestly, even if you don't do that, it will still work. So you can see what I've done here is I've taken my int block shield durability and I've just changed it to float block shield durability. I've commented out the int, but previously it looked like this. The end result you want is this right here. Now we have a float variable to represent the current durability of the block shield. And I want to add two other variables today, and these are related to the regeneration of the block shield, because we never really regenerated the block shield before, we just set it back to the max block shield durability. That's still useful, but we also want to have it generate over time if it's not broken. We don't want it to stay damaged or broken forever. The two variables I'm adding today are integer block shield regen delay and integer block shield remaining regen frames. Now the first one, integer block shield regen delay, that is the number of frames between stopping your block and beginning the regeneration of your block shield, because it shouldn't happen automatically. If it happens automatically, they can basically still spam the block and they will be able to regenerate quickly enough that there is not a lot of room to punish them there. The other one, the block shield remaining regen frames, is how many frames they have until the regeneration can begin, because this delay is the actual value. So say we set it to 180 frames, which is 3 seconds at 60 frames a second. We need to track how far we are into that 3-second window, and that is the remaining regen frames. Now these are both U properties so that you could edit them in the blueprint and visualize them in the blueprint. I used the same U property as I did for the other block parameters, so you could copy and paste it. But basically they are U property, edit anywhere, blueprint, read, write with the category of block. So this allows us to edit it in the blueprint, we can read it and write to it in the blueprint, and this is how it will be organized. It is the same for each of these variables. And they're both integers. Now that we made those variables, we can go ahead and set them in the constructor. So let's go to the SSB template character.cpp and scroll down to the constructor. This is where we set all of our defaults, and we want to update our block shield durability. It's set to max block shield durability. This is fine for now. When it's set to max block shield durability can be an integer, because the block shield durability will be set to 3 when casted to a float is just 3.0f. So that's perfectly safe to keep. But we do need to add our two new variables in here. So I've set my block shield regen delay to 120 frames. And this is 2 seconds. Then we have our block shield remaining regen frames, and that is going to start at 0 because we don't have to regenerate immediately. When the character is spawned, they shouldn't need to regenerate at all, so we can keep them at 0 for now, and then this will be updated when we need them to start regenerating their block shield. Alright, now we want to go down to our take damage function. Here's take damage right here. And in take damage, we end up checking if the player is blocking or not in this else statement. So we have this if statement here that says if the character is not blocking. Then in the else, that means they are blocking. And in here, we were decreasing the block shield durability. This is actually still okay, and it will still work. However, since the block shield durability is a float, doing minus minus float is going to take off a full 1.0 of that value. So if you're fine with that, that is perfectly fine. You can leave it just how it is. Basically, if you have 3.55 left in your block shield durability and you take a hit, you'll automatically skip down to 2.55. If you're at 5.0 and you take a hit, you'll go straight down to 4.0. While it probably should be related to the damage of the attack, we didn't cover that yet in the durability, so I'm going to leave it like this. We'll still have it take a consistent rate. That is something we can figure out later on. When we do that, we'll have to figure out the conversion, so how much damage is how much of the block shield's durability. And once we figure that out, it'll make this a really easy conversion, not a lot of work. But for now, I'm going to leave it just like this. Now, what we were doing is checking to see if the block shield durability was less than or equal to 0. And if it was, we were calling break block shield. I'm going to update this check to make sure it's less than or equal to 0.0f. It's not required that you do that. Just makes it more apparent that it is a float that we're checking against here. And so we know if the block shield durability is less than or equal to 0.0f, we're saying, yep, we are low enough, we can break the block shield. else, this means that the block shield is not broken yet. It still has durability, and we were resizing the block shield component to the appropriate size. We still want to be doing that. That's no different. However, when we are holding the block shield and we want it to decrease its durability over time, that will be done in our tick function. So scrolling down to our tick function, before in tick, we were just calling the parent's tick function, and we were checking our stun frames to see if the character could stop being stunned. Now we're going to add all this logic right here. So in tick, we want to see if our character state is equal to blocking, because if the character state is blocking, then the character is blocking, and we only want to worry about decreasing the block shield's durability if the character is currently blocking. We don't want to just decrease it when they're not using it. Instead, we want to regenerate it when they're not using it. So if the character is blocking, we want to check and see if our block shield durability is greater than 0. If it is greater than 0, then we don't need to break the block shield. Instead, what we need to do is decrease the block shield's durability over time. Now, a good way to do this consistently is to take delta time, which is passed into the tick function, and that is how much time has passed between now and the previous tick. Now, at 60 frames a second, you can imagine that the time passing between frames is pretty small, relatively speaking. But tick runs so fast that taking our block shield durability and subtracting delta time from it is going to occur really quickly. It's going to drain really fast. So what I've done is cut it in half to set your block shield durability to a more reasonable number each frame. This way your block shield doesn't just decrease to nothing immediately. You'll likely want to put an actual value to this instead of a hard-coded 0.5, but I'm going to leave this like this for now. That way I can use it for the demo. We'll go over changing that to a variable after. So I have block shield durability minus equals delta time times 0.5f. So half of delta time each tick is going to be subtracted from block shield durability. Keep in mind that block shield durability is set to max block shield durability at the start, and max block shield durability is set to 3. Now this will keep track of our block shield durability properly, but we need to also resize the block shield component because unlike when taking damage, this is happening every tick. So on tick, we need to be resizing the block shield component. We're going to grab that component that we made in the previous blocking episodes. We're going to say set relative scale 3D, and we're going to pass an F vector using block shield durability on the X and the Z. I keep the block shield durability 1.0 on the Y because I don't want the depth to change since this is a 2.5D game and we're not going into the foreground or the background. I don't want to give off that effect for the block shield. So I just edit the X and the Z parameters. Else, if the block shield durability is not greater than 0, that means it is less than or equal to 0. In which case we want to call it break block shield because the character can break their block shield without ever receiving a hit if they just hold the block button for too long or too frequently without letting it regenerate in between. Now that's all the logic in tick for if the character is blocking, but we have another else statement here, and this covers the logic for when the character is not blocking. So else, if the block shield remaining regen frames is greater than 0, remember, in the constructor, we set this value to 0. They don't have any remaining frames until they can regenerate. If we did, then we don't want to regenerate. If they're still waiting to regenerate, we don't want to start regenerating now. But if it is greater than 0, we need to decrease our block shield remaining regen frames. So essentially, take away a frame every tick that we're waiting until we can regenerate our block shield. So minus block shield remaining regen frames. Then, once that is done, we need to make sure that the block shield durability is less than the max block shield durability, meaning that there is shield to regenerate, and the block shield remaining regen frames is less than or equal to 0. Like I just said, if the block shield remaining regen frames is greater than 0, then we have to wait until we can actually regenerate our block shield. But if it's less than or equal to 0, we are ready to regenerate our block shield. At this point, we want to take block shield durability and add the delta time being passed in tick. Now, if you want, you could also do the times 0.5 here to slow down how fast it is. You'll see that my block shield regenerates faster than it goes down from using it. And so I had them at separate times on purpose, separate rates, but you could keep them the same or you could keep them different. It doesn't matter. Then we want to also set our relative scale for the block shield component to the same thing we did above. This time it's going to be growing instead of shrinking, but really it's the same process. There's two more things we want to do. One thing I actually want to do here is update the name of this block shield regen delay variable that we made. As I was going over this, I noticed it would make more sense to call it block shield regen delay frames, since I put frames in front of all the other ones that are representative of frames. And when you do this, of course, you will have to update it in the constructor as well. So instead of block shield regen delay, call it block shield regen delay frames. Now, after that is done, our tick function is good to go. This will cover all the shrinking and growing of the block shield, as well as the decreasing and increasing of the durability of the block shield. There's only one thing we need to do now, and that is to reset the block shield remaining regen frames equal to the maximum value. In my case, I want the time to start regenerating the block shield to count down once we stop blocking. We don't want to do it on hit, because if we're still blocking, then we want to still be taking away from the durability of the block shield. However, once the character stops blocking, at that point they are ready to start regenerating some shield, or at least to start the countdown to start regenerating some shield. So we're going to scroll up to our stop blocking function, and in this function, if the character was blocking, we call stop blocking. We do this so if they release the button and they weren't previously blocking, we can't reset their state to idle and do other things we shouldn't do. And so at this point, we need to set our block shield remaining regen frames equal to the block shield regen delay frames. So remember, this was 120, which is basically 2 seconds. And we're resetting the block shield remaining regen frames to that value, so that in 2 seconds we can start regenerating the block shield. Now this is when we stop blocking. We also want to make sure when the block shield is broken that we reset this value as well. So I'm going to scroll down to my break block shield function, and in here I'm just going to hardcore reset my block shield remaining regen frames to 0. Once the block shield is broken, they won't be able to open up their block shield while they're stunned, but after their stun is done, we should reset this. We don't need to make them wait any longer. At that point, they already did their stun. They can now block as usual. Going up to the start blocking function, you can see that we check to make sure the character is not stunned. So if they're stunned, they can't block. So again, once they are done with their stun, then they can block again, at which point we don't need to delay them from regenerating shield after that. They should have the full shield and just remain that way, just like when we initially spawn the character. Basically want to set everything back to that state. And the other thing I want to show you is that you could set up regeneration or dissipating rates for your block shield. So if you wanted to, you could make rates for the, let's make multipliers. Let's say the multiplier for how quickly the block shield is consumed. Consumed is a good word here. And I'm going to use the same mu property as my other block variables. And I'm going to call this one float block shield consumption multiplier. And then I'm going to make another one, the multiplier for how quickly the block shield regenerates. This is the actual regeneration, not the time between exiting your block and regenerating. And I'm going to put the U property there, same as above, and I'm going to make another float and say block shield regeneration multiplier. Alright, and at this point, I'm going to go into my constructor and go below my other block variables. I'm going to grab these two, block shield, can't spell shield right for some reason, consumption multiplier, and we're going to set it equal to let's do 0.5 because that's what we were using in the tick. And then we'll do block shield regeneration multiplier equals, and we'll say 0.3. We'll make it different. Now we can go into the tick function and we can update our 0.5s to these appropriate values. So this is when we are depleting the block shield. And so we want to say times equals the block shield consumption multiplier. Here is where the block shield is regenerating. So here we want to use our block shield regeneration multiplier. And there you go. We can stop this and I'll run the game again and I'll show you what it looks like with those new values in here. And now you can see, as we come into the game here, I can regenerate my block shield. And you can see it's a little slow. Much slower than it was before. It is working. It's getting bigger as I let it sit for longer. But it's much slower. The regeneration rate and the consumption rate have been changed by those multipliers. So you'll want to play around with them and make sure that you get the values that you want, and you can change them per character as well if you want. So different characters could have different consumption and regeneration rates. But there you go, guys. I hope you liked this video on block shields, and if you did, please subscribe and consider joining the Patreon or supporting me through YouTube membership or super thanks. Really appreciate you guys, and thank you to all who have already done it. Working on more updates to make this screen look a little bit nicer. I also would like to show off your support and the role that you earned on Patreon YouTube membership on the screen, so look out for the updates on that. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. Be happy to help you out, and the assistance is completely free. Otherwise, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.